Welcome to an exclusive FMI learning event. The Financial Management Institute is the leading source in Canada for professional development in new and emerging trends, best practices, and topical issues related to public sector financial management. We're a nationwide organization that has expanded over the years to include provincial and municipal public sector perspective in our numerous chapters all across Canada.
The FMI delivers a comprehensive program of learning and professional development through various events such as seminars, workshops, webinars, and publications. As an industry-leading organization, the FMI is able to attract leaders and experts who regularly contribute to the FMI learning experience. Whether it's our flagship learning events, a regional session across Canada, a monthly interactive webinar, or any of our publications, the FMI provides a venue for these partners to communicate their knowledge and experience.
The integrity and the reputation of the FMI brand allows for premium networking opportunities. Our members and attendees are able to raise their profile and take advantage of connections and contacts with industry experts and individuals in their field of interest.
Today's FMI is the result of contribution of many volunteers, individuals like you and I who decided to get involved. Listen to some of the benefits that our volunteers have experienced from their time with the FMI.
The benefits of volunteering are professional and personal.
The networking, meeting with people.
You couldn't ask for a better contact in making contacts and learning as to what's going on.
It affords volunteers great exposure.
Definitely it will improve your leadership capacity.
A lot of learning opportunities.
But mostly it's the people.
Go ahead and get involved because you couldn't ask for a better asset on your resume as well.
In order to continue our growth and renewal, we're constantly seeking to engage members in our community.
If you are interested in growing your own career, working with dynamic people, while at the same time giving back to the community, then you should consider volunteering with the FMI.
Speak to one of the organizers or visit the volunteer section of our website for more information. Enjoy your exclusive FMI learning event and join us in striving for excellence in public sector financial management.
Hello, my name is Andre Laflamme. I am a project manager at the Financial Management Institute of Canada's national office. You've tuned into the December 11th, 2014 FMI webinar entitled How to Brief Senior Management. For this webinar, we've gathered a great group of speakers, the first being Mr. Jack Diao. He is a young financial analyst and the national chair of the FMI's Aspiring Leaders Network. He'll be moderating the panel. The two panelists, we have two panelists, the first being David Miller. He is our resident senior manager. He's currently a consultant and former senior financial manager at the federal government with over 35 years of experience in the Canadian federal government. Joining him, we have a representative of the middle management, Mr. Jocelyn Gaumont. Mr. Gaumont is a manager of financial systems and client services at Public Works and Government Services Canada. You can look at both of their full biographies on our webinars page at www.fmi.ca. We're now going to go live to the webinar where these two gentlemen are discussing how the do's and don'ts of briefing senior management. The first person you'll see speaking will be Mr. David Miller, and we'll go directly to his presentation. Enjoy, guys.
The bottom line on all briefings, and the biggest mistake you can make, is surprising people. And that may not be in the presentation itself. It may be comments that you make, and you're sitting in a room with your boss and perhaps briefing your boss's boss or someone more senior than that, doesn't matter, and all of a sudden something comes out that they're not aware of. That is disorienting, all right, for everybody in the room, okay?
We call it ambush by PowerPoint.
That's right, exactly, and it happens. And it may not be PowerPoint. It may be something saying, oh, since we made this slide, you know, life has changed and now the direction is completely different than what's down here. It could be any number of factors in there. But please, avoid surprising anyone in the room with what you've done. So the more you can prepare, the more you can put into your presentation, the more up to date it is, but provide enough time for people to review it before the actual time, then the better off we are. Okay, Next situation here is types of meetings. And why is it happening? And to me, there's really two. There's the formal, where you have to watch the pecking order in the room. Okay, you may be with, as a financial analyst, you may have a series of ADMs in there, and some that are friends to the financial community in the department, and some that aren't friends. And you'll know before going in who those are. Okay, that'll be a part of the history of the department. But you've got to understand your audience, and you've got to be able to react to those changes, and you also have to expect the pecking order in the room to be important. Obviously, if the deputy minister is there, he or she is going to take over whatever discussion is going on. But many times it's a group of ADMs, and it'll be more difficult to pick that out. Who's going to lead the charge, or who's going to take the control of a particular information exchange? And the other one is informal. And this one we talked about. To me, the elevator, running into someone in an elevator and getting a quick, what happened here? To me, the senior person is doing two things with that. They're showing interest that, okay, they know the project that they're working on, and we've got some major renovations going here in the FMI suite, so that's, it's not a dentist in the next office, it's definitely jackhammers, but if you can hear that through the microphone.
I think they're putting a new drywall in.
That could be. But I can work around that. So anyway, so the informal one, again, they do it in order to show interest, but they do it in order for to find out, do I really need to be briefed on more on this? Has there been developments that you should really tell me about? And chances are they don't want that in an elevator for a whole bunch of reasons. They just want you to identify, yes, we're at a point now where we should be talking about these issues because they're going to need some decisions in the future, or no, everything's running along smoothly and we don't have to worry about it for the next few weeks, and you shouldn't concern yourself because it's life is perfect. All right, so it's that kind of just almost polite conversation in the elevator, but it's certainly not the time to ask, your senior manager to turn left or turn right on a particular project or a particular thing going on. They're just not prepared to do that at that point. It'd be very unusual. And the next thing I'd like to just sort of close off here with is assuming that you have a good boss, assuming that the person, whether it's your boss's boss or someone more indirectly involved with what you do, but if they are a good boss, then he or she really, really likes to see you perform well.
Yes.
I mean, they're there to bring you along. There's a series of mentoring. There's a series of help. It's all rolled up. So they really like to see other people succeed in what they're doing and how they bring it forward. And they'll get a big kick out of that, of you being successful. And I had a boss at one time whose favorite expression was that he basks in the glory of others' accomplishments. Okay, so he didn't really do anything. He just stood and took all of the glory from everyone else. Now, his job was to make sure that those other people could accomplish things. So it wasn't that he didn't do anything, but it was the fact that he recognized, I'm not the one doing all of these things. I've got a team that's doing it, and I really appreciate what you've done. So most bosses, again, started out the middle or the bottom. They've been on the other side. They've given more than their share of briefings, so they understand how nervousness or how particular things can go off the rails during one, or something may not work out the way you expect, and that's just part of life. It's not a major crisis, it's just part of, but what they want to do is see these people succeed who are in a position to do that, especially the young up-and-comers. So put yourself in their shoes, understand where they're coming from, their interests, their expectations, and you can't go wrong. As long as you have a good understanding of your audience and a good understanding of their expectations and their interests, then chances are things will go exceedingly well.
Thank you, David. Earlier when you mentioned that there is the formal meeting, which is structured usually in a boardroom, vis-a-vis the informal meeting, which is often quite literally an elevator pitch, what advice would you give to young financial analysts as with regards to the tone and the content of the message? What should you present in a formal meeting that, for example, you should certainly avoid in an informal elevator pitch and vice versa?
I think it totally depends on the subject, and it's very difficult to say yes or no. The advantage, obviously, of the formal meeting is the individual, and I'm sure Jocelyn will talk about this, but how they prepare for it, and I'll leave that up for him to discuss, and how you get things organized. The disadvantage of the formal meeting is you never get that one-on-one type contact. It's not immediate, and it's not sort of accurate feedback on exactly what's going on. There's a lot of intermediaries in that whole process. So I would suggest in the informal one, if you've got a message, then you say it, like, I'd like to sit down and if you have some time to go over all of this material because we're in trouble here. or I need some decisions out of that, and then you get your boss and your team involved and everything else along the way to the informal one, or to a more formal setting. So it's very much of the subject, and there's no right or wrong approach to it, but they're going to be very different.
Thank you very much, David. Now, Jocelyn, you have briefed and been briefed many times at many levels, both informally and formally. Would you like to walk us through your process of briefing properly?
Absolutely, and we're always briefing, aren't we? Yourself, everybody that's listening
Yes.
on the webinar.
Quite literally.
Thank you, by the way, for the nice intro. Thank you to the FMI and the Aspiring Leaders Network for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here today to brief you on briefing, senior management. So if I can use an example of my preparation for this webinar, which is very similar to an approach that I would use to get a brief ready for any member of my senior management. Right off the bat, when I was asked to participate, I started thinking about the topic. I started writing down my ideas and so on and so forth. It's important to know the objective of the brief, the purpose of the brief. Ask yourself, okay, why am I here? You know, obviously you need to do some research on the subject matter. Hopefully you know what the subject matter is all about. You will consult stakeholders and colleagues and whatnot, because most of the time we're working as a team, right? It's rare that it's one individual. Yes, it might be one individual giving the brief itself, but I mean there's a team behind you that you're working with that'll put the stuff together and provide you with some valid information. So once you've started putting your ideas down on paper, then you start putting your ideas in order, basically. You want to organize your ideas. You want to obviously be clear, concise, to the point. While you're giving your briefing, you're either giving your briefing verbally or in writing. So I always tend to be as professional as I can, as respectful as I can, and also sincere and confident in what you're conveying. That goes a long way, obviously. Be compelling, be honest, in short, be a good storyteller, and be brief, right? The word says it itself. Don't sugarcoat it. I mean, if it's good news or bad news, I mean, they'll appreciate it, your senior managers, that you're giving them the truth, basically. Don't BS it, because they'll see right through you. And back up your information. Like, I mean, in your research, if you're talking about a policy, for instance, or a law or something like that, I mean, it's good to let your audience know that you've done your due diligence and what you're telling them is in fact reality and is backed up. I also have other topics that we can discuss, like how to deliver a good brief. I touched upon it in my first introduction. So how to deliver. Again, you can use various tools. David mentioned the PowerPoint presentation. You can use a one-pager, a memo. If you're briefing on the status of a project, you've often seen or used the dashboards and the likes. You can use visuals. If you were at the FMI PD Week on the Wednesday, that author that wrote the book of Awesome, he was excellent in his speech and his keynote speech rather, and his use of visuals was great, excellent. What else? Make sure you make eye contact with your audience. I think I mentioned this before. It's important, and David touched on this as well. It's important that you know your audience, obviously. You'll structure the information and the way you convey your message maybe a bit differently if you're, I don't know, talking to admin or support staff versus, in this case here, we're talking about senior management, obviously. Looking at my notes here, while you're delivering your brief, if it's verbally, I mean, it's good to set a good tempo, a good rhythm. Timing is important as well. Timing in the sense that when you are briefing, rather, your senior management, it's the timing is important. Like, I mean, they want valid information, specific information at the right time, right? Because obviously they take that information, and for them, it's either they make a decision. Mostly that's it, right? What else? Be aware, or beware rather, of information overload. I mean, there's tons of information, so strip it down to the very necessity. and give it to them straight. Like, I mean, like I said before, don't sugarcoat it or paint a bad or a wrong picture. An advanced skill, if I may, also is that when you're addressing an audience or your senior manager, body language sometimes helps. Like, I mean, if your audience all have a face of what's the term I'm looking for here? If they all look confused, then you know, you might want to go back on that topic and sort of clarify things and ask them if they understood what you just told them, and so on and so forth. So that would be my opening remarks. I'll let Jack moderate the webinar, but we can get into what kind of skills and competencies one can develop to improve on their briefing skills and whatnot. And I can share some reference materials that I consulted while I was getting ready for this webinar as well, like books and websites and the likes. So.
Certainly, Jocelyn. You touched upon different mediums of briefing, notably the verbal briefing versus the written briefing. Also, we know that there are multiple ways within government to brief people in a written manner. There's the one-pager, as you said. There are different formats of briefing notes. And I'd just like to know, in your experience, what are the greatest differences in the presentation of a proper verbal versus written briefing? And what we should really, take care to watch out for? What are the common pitfalls?
My goodness, they're very, they're different. That's a fact, but they're very similar. Like, I mean, even though I'm briefing verbally, I will have a one-pager or I will have some kind of draft with my ideas lined out. So differences, obviously, things you have to watch out for if it's in writing is the grammar, and making sure that you convey your message clearly. How many times have we, somebody said something and we're 3 or 4 around the table and we all understood differently? Exactly. One example of a written brief that I've been providing my ADM very recently, I was the branch coordinator for our United Way campaign at work. So it wasn't very complicated. Every Friday I would send my ADM an email, not a very long one, but it contained a spreadsheet with all of the numbers, where we were at in meeting our targets for the donations and so on and so forth, and with just 3, 4, or 5 bullet points of important facts that I wanted to share with her. And we were mentioning feedback a while ago. A good way to know if your brief is good is that if your ADM takes your email and only forwards it without any changes to her DGs, then you're smiling and you figure, you tap yourself on the back and you're like, oh, that must have been a good brief. She did not change a word. In other cases, I've seen where my briefs had been massacred and changed altogether. All she kept was the spreadsheet itself. I guess she didn't want to share the information that I had shared with her, or she wanted to convey like a different point of view or something like that.
To the point where you don't recognize your own work.
Well, except for the Excel spreadsheet, like just the copy paste of the table that I'd put in there. But I mean, it happens, and you learn, and you learn from your. I don't want to call them mistakes, but I mean...
I'd like to say that it doesn't necessarily mean that the briefer, the author of the briefing is wrong. As both of you gentlemen pointed out, sometimes it's a matter of audience and relevance. Sometimes when I give briefings and there's massacring or very, very great fundamental changes, it's not because the information I provided is wrong or that the people listening to this presentation provided are wrong. It's simply because sometimes the level of the information is not appropriate for the audience. Sometimes when you're briefing ADMs, you want to cut back on the very detailed and technical information, and you want to give them decision-specific information.
Yeah.
Would you gentlemen care to confirm that?
Well, again, it gets back to understanding your boss. I was always one who enjoyed the kind of technical stuff and get into the mumbo-jumbo there and why we're going this or that way. But, and it's certainly true, in other circumstances, you want to keep it at a level that they're comfortable with. And it's difficult when you get a new person in who you're briefing to understand exactly what that level is. So you rely on their immediate reporting group to let you know, gee, is this the kind of thing they like, or is it... I worked for a deputy minister who insisted that he not use, those paper clips, the ones, they're mostly black, but you open them this way and hold about 500 pages.
Yes.
You never sent him one of those, right? Because he would reject whatever it was, didn't matter what was in it. You had to be in a binder as opposed to be in a paper clip. So it was those kind of idiosyncrasies, that was not important, but there were lots of other ones that you figure out when you're briefing, okay, how can I smooth this out? I mean, are they happy with getting something an hour before a meeting, or does it have to be up there 2 days before to make sure that they have an ample opportunity to actually review it and understand it? Those kind of things you have to work out.
And our senior managers don't have the time to read hundreds upon hundreds of pages of information. That's our job, you know, to summarize and to present to them a summary of that information, you know. What else? I mean, it's important, like good briefs. I'm one that I'm always concerned with my reputation. Like, I mean, preparation, put in the time, because I mean, one bad brief to your ADM or CFO or whatnot, it sort of affects a bit your credibility. So the next time you go into his or her office, like, I mean, he or she will already have some kind of, you know,
Preconception?
A
You'll
little
have
bit,
more redeeming to do?
Yeah. My opinion, anyways. And I'm not claiming to be an expert, by the way. I forgot to mention my disclaimer at the start of my seminar. Another thing, we did not call each other. We have good taste, so we're all wearing similar suits this
Yeah,
week.
I guess we don't know how that happened.
Just an FYI on the side. Humor sometimes is good
Humor
to
is
use in
good.
briefs, but I mean, be careful. You don't want to pass as the office clown or anything like that, but sometimes, you know, a good little opening joke and whatnot that's in good taste and whatnot would settle the pace or the atmosphere in the room sometimes, because in some meetings it can get stressful, and we're making important decisions and we're discussing important topics for, you know, so.
Now, David Miller mentioned the importance of scouting out one's audience and be knowing in advance whether or not they would be comfortable with something. What do you have to add to that, Ghislaine? How would you suggest, you know, that a junior staff goes to discover, you know, what a senior manager does like or does not like, or what level of humor they're ready to tolerate, and so on?
As far as humor is concerned, well, you get to know the senior managers. You get to hear them speak at different events, and that's another point I'd like to make. Like, observe good speakers, good. You know, if you see somebody in a meeting delivering a good brief, like, take note, learn from that. What else? In going into meetings like that, and when you're briefing on any given topic, also, my associate DM the other day was speaking at an event. I can't remember which one it was, but he mentioned that one of his strategies was that before even entering a meeting and briefing on any given topic, he would have consulted stakeholders and colleagues and whatnot, and would have gathered support already for whatever it was he was presenting to the DM or whomever. So that's another good strategy to use. Make sure that, like we were saying, no surprises.
So preparation is certainly half the battle.
Preparation is more than half the battle, in my opinion.
You also both touched on the point of being concise and of only presenting on paper or on the slide the very essentials, the bare bones of the information. I mean, we often say there's a reason it's called PowerPoint and not Power Paragraph or Power Novel.
Mm-hmm.
How do we take something that is fairly complicated, that requires a decision that has good impact or very great impact? How do we take that story and boil it down to the very bare essentials? Do we come with a whole binder of backup information in case they decide to dig deeper? How?
I think in my experience anyway, both presenting and being presented, is that if you do have that crucial decision, that one thing that you want to get to, but then you say, well, I have to put this in the right context. And for that, they have to know a little bit about history. They have to know where we're coming from. They have to know a little bit about what caused the environment or circumstances that we're in now. And anything else that you can bring in that will filter down and lead them to that one point. Well, obviously we got a problem here. We have an issue. We're going to have to deal with that. And this issue is on page 7, and boom, it's highlighted. Which gets back to the point of, if they've read all that material, then you can simply spend, you know, just 10 or 15 seconds on each of those preliminary slides to give the highlights. You know, the history slide, which says that let's use a program problem. It was created 10 years ago and it's been running smoothly, but then you get to the circumstances or environment that led to the problem, and just go through very quickly, and then that allows you to focus on that one area. So build backwards. Look at what you need to get a decision out of, and make sure you're providing them with the right context. And that doesn't mean 300 pages of documentation. It means things that are relevant to what you want discussed and debated and possibly decided.
So in a sense, you would say that the briefer's job is not only to provide background information, but also to create a reasoning path to sort of steer the decision making. At the end, senior management will be given the alternatives, but they will be steered toward that decision.
Right, and what you may find, and occasionally it happens, is someone will look at this and say, oh, well, you know, your presentation is missing the impact it has on other players or something. So I want you to come back and bring that to the table next week, because we can't make a decision without that. So that's what you want to avoid if you can. You know, you want to think about it ahead of time and say, are they going to be concerned about the impact on other areas? Or, you know, if they are, then I need a slide on that somehow to take care of that and show that I've addressed it. So it's not as much moving through a funnel to a particular area. It's ensuring that the mouth of the funnel has all of the elements in it at some point to be able to address the current circumstances. So.
Thank you, David. Justin, did you have any take on this?
Maybe a couple of things. Like, I've seen PowerPoint presentations that looked like reports or business cases. It was amazing. I don't even know why they used PowerPoint. They should have used Word and whatnot. Know how much time you have to brief your audience. That's key as well. Don't get caught up in the details and then you have 1 minute left to wrap up and you haven't even addressed the issue. Right up front, state your purpose and your objective, then get into the details. And it all depends on what the topic is. Are you seeking a decision, approval, disapproval? Are you presenting options, pros and cons? Risk, change management are big topics, you know. Basically.
So basically to let the audience know ahead of time what you expect from them, as well as what they can expect from you.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of expectations, I think a lot of people watching might be thinking this on their minds. When we provide the materials ahead of time, how much ahead of time should we provide the materials? And to what degree of familiarity should we expect our audience to have with said materials? I mean, it varies from management to management, but I think, David, when you said that some people come and read the slides and read the documentation literally, it might not be because they're bad at briefing. It might simply be because they think management hasn't really taken the time to go through the material, or management wasn't briefed prior to this at all. What is your take on this, Joe? How much do we expect?
Well, I think my first point was ask at the beginning, because there are circumstances where they can't get to it, and they'll apologize, but it's better to have the meeting than to allow them the proper time in order to go through it. But in my experience, most senior managers will have read whatever's going to be presented, because they want to form their own opinions. They want to add value to that. They don't just want to take stuff in. They want to actually do something with the materials being presented with them and make a decision or advance a file, or whatever the reason for the meeting is, they want to contribute to it. So the only way you can do that is pretty well have a pretty good idea of what they're going to be talking about during the presentation ahead of time. And so yes, ask for sure, and be prepared to switch from one to the other. From a detailed presentation that provides everyone the background without reading it, to one that simply goes over highlights on each one and allows them to then move on to the real nub of the matter at hand.
Thank you, David. Jocelyn, how many days do you usually give them?
Oh, it varies. I mean, I've seen a week to 2 weeks, depending on what the committee was or what the brief was all about. I've often seen ADM offices, DM offices use templates that they wanted the branches within the department to use as the information was flowing upwards, right? Those are good. They certainly help, but one size fits all isn't always the case. So you sometimes have to modify, you know, the template a little bit. What else was I going to say? I've seen memos coming through my office where I had to review requests for foreign travel requests that I had to send back. I think this is not an actual figure. It's we must have sent back 9 out of 10 of these memos all the time, either for grammar mistakes, either for them being too long, either for them not to be specific with criterias that we were asking for. You know, were they policy compliant? Did they meet our government or our mandate and our priorities and so on and so forth? So these were requests that were going through the CFO's office and making their way to the DM's office for his or her approval, right? So their time is precious. They don't want to be like they want to see only what's important, you know.
So the idea is if we have these tiny issues like grammar or like formatting, we want to resolve them early and at the lowest level possible. I mean, it's not very hard. In Word, you press F7, there's the grammar and spelling check, and I am sure that there are templates that are approved, right, in the office for what constitutes a good briefing note, what constitutes a good, acceptable one-pager.
There's good courses too with the Canada School of Public Service, effective writing. I forget what they are. I didn't bring them with me, but I sort of, not Googled them, but I did a little bit of research at that end, how to give effective presentations. There's actually one on briefing specifically. I've never taken it, but I might in the future, next year or something.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad you touched on the best practices and on the formats, because I think we have one of the questions on our panel, on our questions box actually says, to your knowledge, gentlemen, is there a federal government best practice outline for written briefing for TBS or any other briefing note? Or is there a one-size-fits-all?
No, but for TBS there are, and for things like formal presentations, right, whether you're talking memorandums of cabinet or Treasury Board submissions, there is way too much formatted information in there. And I've unfortunately had to read too many of these things, and the difference is, unfortunately, it is one size tries to fit all, and you end up with a lot of extraneous stuff that's irrelevant. So you have, I mean, for me, the fun part is you go through 25 pages in order to find actually what the proposal is and what the impact is going to be of the proposal, whether or not it's approved. But you have to have everything else, including a lot of areas that may or may not be implicated by that particular document. Within a department, it's the style of the deputy, and that tends to filter down to each of the ADMs, because if you're going to write something up to go to the deputy, the last thing you want to do is have to change it between the ADM's office and the deputies, right? So that becomes fairly obvious, and they do have their idiosyncrasies, some of them. Most of them don't. Most of them are just looking for clarity and are willing to take, gee, how the department briefed his or her predecessor on issues, and I'll accept that, but you know, it gets modified over time. The people in the deputy minister's office tend to have a huge impact, both, and now it's at the ADM level, both in terms of the content and the format of notes going up. So again, it's there isn't much at the departmental level. They will have guidelines on how to present things. They may have guidelines on specific proposals, like coming through for extra resources or doing something like that, where you've got to include all it, or in your case, foreign travel. But in general terms, it just, you know, obviously there's a fair amount of common sense involved with how you approach it.
No, I agree completely. I don't think there is one briefing note format for the whole of government, but certainly TB subs, MCs, and important documents like that do have a format which we're very strict to follow. No, that's it for me.
Great, thank you. I'd like us to now move on, gentlemen, to the skills that are required to be a good briefer, to be a good storyteller, as you would put it. Now, you've no doubt seen many good ones and many not so good ones in your time. What would you say, gentlemen, are the required skills, and what do you think separates a great briefing from just simply an average one?
Jocelyn, you want to answer that one first?
Sure. Obviously, communication skills to me are the most important, or the most important skill, rather. And we tend to forget that listening is also a component of being a good communicator. Oftentimes we see people that are either not paying attention or are anxious to speak and whatnot, and sometimes I'm like that a little bit. I have to hold back and just listen to what the people around the table are saying and take it in, and then when my time comes to speak, I do. What else? Strategic thinking, I mean, covers everything, be it that you're briefing senior management or that you're doing an analysis of some kind or looking or reviewing a business process or whatnot. That's a big key leadership competency that the government is pushing, obviously, and in the private sector too, for that matter. So a good tool to consult, and I'm pretty sure all of our audience members have consulted it, is the TBS competency list that's on their website. So I encourage everybody to consult that document on a regular basis. If you're applying for a job, if you're going on an interview, if you're preparing to brief senior management, whatever you're doing, it's a good document to consult.
And I guess if you get back to the fundamental issue of how do you tell a good briefing from a bad one, yes, the communication skills, that becomes obvious when someone is comfortable with what they're talking about, when someone is able to get to the point without, you know, a lot of extraneous stuff going on around it.
Fluff, so-called.
Yes, but it becomes obvious, and a lot of it is how comfortable you are in that situation. Then the rest of it becomes much easier. So if I got any advice to the young up-and-comers, I would almost say, get used to doing this, all right? I used to give, back 100 years ago, I used to give courses for when the Public Service Commission had all of the course content internally.
Right.
And I did that and probably 5 or 6 times a year, what I would do a morning or a full day's course for them on budgeting and government, on financial management, on all kinds of aspects of that. But I got so that you're very comfortable in that situation where you're briefing people, and that was extremely important to me through the rest of my career, of being able to sit in a room. I've appeared in front of parliamentary committees literally hundreds of times and been perfectly comfortable with that. So it's a very different feeling than going in full of angst and full of misapprehension. Did I get things right, or do I ever? You can smooth over a mistake or two just in the general content of going forward, but you have to be comfortable with what you're talking about, and you have to be comfortable with the way you're going to present it.
So both in terms of the content and the presentation.
Yes.
I mean, you're not expected to be perfect. I mean, you can make mistakes while speaking, but you need to be very, very comfortable with the material you're handling.
Right.
And practice makes perfect. Like, I mean, you won't be an excellent briefer or debriefer right off the bat. Hopefully you have bosses that will give you the opportunity to brief during meetings. Jack, you're a perfect example. You're always moderating webinars and seeing events at our department. So that's another way of practicing your speaking skills. Another key skill that I have on my one-pager here is learning how to answer questions, being fast on your feet, basically. It's almost an art form, but I mean, it's a good skill to have in a meeting scenario or while you're briefing. If you don't have the answer off the top of your head, there's a way of maneuvering and letting them know that you'll get back to them and so on and so forth. Beware of the meeting villains, where I don't know, for whatever reason, there's somebody around the table that either doesn't like you or that keeps sort of challenging you on different aspects of the brief and whatnot. So I don't know what their agendas are, but anyways, there's a way, a respectful way, a professional way of not tossing them aside, but addressing their questions and whatnot, and maybe letting them know that after the meeting we can maybe follow up with you on your additional questions, if you will.
Right.
Because you don't want them to
Take up the time and
exactly,
the focus. Right?
exactly.
Sometimes it's a simple matter of saying, "Sir, madam, I'd be pleased to address this question in private after the briefing."
Yeah, it's one way of handling it. Yeah.
It's a funny term. You mentioned meeting villains.
Got that out of a book. Though,
What
not
are
mine.
villains and what do they do?
Yeah.
And how can we sidestep or sort of avoid that
I
happening?
have
to
no
us?
idea what their issue is. Like, I get along with everybody, so I don't think it's personal or anything like that. And it hasn't happened to me recently, but I was attending an FMI session at the PD Week,
Right.
and one of the speakers, one of the audience members, would just keep drilling him with question after question after question after question. The poor person that was the speaker was getting a bit uncomfortable, but anyways, he handled it very well. Exactly, that's what he said. He said, if you have additional questions, I'd like to give the opportunity to others to ask questions. Come speak to me afterwards. We were done, right? It was an afternoon session, I think it was. I forget which stream. I sort of moved from stream to stream, but anyways.
I guess just on that point, that's an interesting term, and I hadn't heard that. I like to ask a lot of questions at meetings, because again, I am in a way challenging the people giving the presentation. I want to see the scope of their understanding of the issue beyond what's on the page or what's on the PowerPoint presentation. I do have legitimate questions coming out of it, saying, well, did you consider this, or what is the impact here that I want to get on the table? And I could be obviously a pain in the butt by doing that, but that's part of my role. I mean, I'm there to ensure that we, for something like departmental audit committees, that someone has done their homework and understands all of the implications of whatever they're presenting. And yes, you can say, I don't know and I'll get back to you, but you can't do it every time.
No.
You can't do it all the time. So that, again, being comfortable with what you're presenting and being comfortable with the kind of environment that surrounds what you're presenting is extremely important, probably the number one thing.
As much as you can address during the meeting, the better.
Yeah.
I don't like coming out of a meeting with 100 things to do, 100 follow-ups to do, 100, but like you said, anticipate the type of questions you're going to get asked. Again, it's in the preparation. If you know your stuff, you'll answer every single question, you'll have the information. I've accompanied directors, DGs in briefs to more senior managers, where I was there just to offer support, and I had the big binder in case we got hung up on something. But it did basically. I spoke up if if the conversation steered my way and whatnot. But obviously, I'm one that respects the hierarchy of an organization. So obviously, it was my DG debriefing the CFO. I appreciated the opportunity of being there. Obviously, I worked on the brief. I forget what the topic was. We would go every other week or so to discuss matters, various matters. But that's another key way of improving your skills. If your bosses take you along once in a while to meetings and whatnot, certainly grasp that opportunity.
So essentially, it's a sort of an opportunity to shadow on a briefing session, right? I mean, if your boss is comfortable, then this is definitely a venue that we should all pursue. Just ask, hey manager, next time you brief the senior director, or next time you have a briefing that we worked on, may I sit in? As someone who is just an observer.
Mm-hmm.
That's personally, that helped me a lot. On that note, I'd like to ask, are there any other recommended routes you would give us with respect to improving our speaking skills, or our answering skills, or communication skills? Because we don't want to be practicing when we're in front of the CFO.
Yeah.
We want to be juggling fluently like breathing.
Hey, it's any opportunity that you have, and I mean, another strategy that I like using also is keeping the brief or the presentation or whatnot conversational. We hate people reading their notes, being boring in front of an audience and whatnot. But I mean, you got stuff like United Way where we're asking for volunteers and whatnot. If you have the opportunity to help out and whatnot, and you have the opportunity to speak in front of an audience, by all means, Blueprint 2020 offers also excellent opportunities. Networks in your departments, Toastmasters, you name it.
Yeah, Toastmasters is an excellent venue. Also, as Jocelyn said, to practice one's skills, we can certainly start small, right?
Absolutely.
Sometimes for the government workplace charity campaign, you can certainly volunteer to give an information session, or to instruct canvassers on how to proceed. Or you can volunteer to be part of a departmental address. There are always different initiatives that are being rolled out that require MCs or volunteers or speakers. This in my experience has been a good training tool for you. What would you say, David?
I agree 100%, but you have to recognize that people have different strengths, and that certain people are going to be shy, they're going to be uncomfortable in front of crowds, they're going to have difficulty dealing with getting that key message across, or even being comfortable enough to go through that. So it's recognizing yourself. You don't strike me as a shy person at all.
I'm terribly shy.
Yeah, you've hidden it well, okay? But there are people that aren't comfortable, so they have a different problem. And I'm not sure, because I'm not particularly shy either, but they have a different problem that they're going to have to come to grips with. Because throughout your career, as Jocelyn said right at the beginning, you spend your whole day briefing people or being briefed. That's that's what you do. So and they have to get around their particular shortcomings, and the best way to do that is through practice, through different venues, and start small, as you said. But some have a lot further to go to reach that comfort level than others.
Jocelyn, earlier when you mentioned documentation or Canada School of Public Service, you mentioned there were courses on exactly that, on how to prepare briefing notes.
There is one, yeah.
I see. One of the, we got a question.
Is it still offered? I don't know, but it was in the list. It was the one at the very bottom of, I forget the code, but anyway.
I see, but there's definitely a course on that.
Yeah.
Okay. And we have a question online wanting to know if, is there a document that you would recommend reading if one is getting ready for an interview or a briefing?
There's a big difference.
There is. Yeah.
There is a difference between interviews and briefings. I'd just like to know, I mean, can you sort of see your interview as a briefing on your own history, a briefing on your own performance, on your skills?
I went through a period of time where people were having difficulty reaching a certain level at the EX2 level. And what I did was I recommended to them in any interview they go in is to take 7 questions that they think they will be answered, that will be asked during that period, and prepare answers to them. So again, that's very similar to understanding where you come from and why. So if you think of 7 questions you think are relevant to the job that you're being interviewed for, and those aren't on the actual interview, then you're probably in the wrong room anyway, okay?
Right.
But if they are there, then you've already beaten the system. You have actually gone in prepared to the point. And I think a lot of times, especially at the senior levels, something that I started and it's now normal practice is to allow people a half hour before the interview just to gather their thoughts together so that they can write down a few notes and whatever those questions are that are coming up. And that's especially true because you're never faced with a situation where someone out of the blue says, what's the answer to this, right? How many digits in pi? And you just, so obviously under normal life you have briefing material to look at, you have people that support you to give you that. So in an interview, you should have time to prepare. And again, if you can figure out the answers to the questions that they might ask and approach those, chances are you'll hit it out of the park if you've got the questions right.
Thank you. So still, David, preparation.
Oh,
Preparation
absolutely.
is half the battle.
Absolutely.
Great
More-
questions online, by the way. Thank you for those questions. Joss, we were just wondering if you had a take on that.
I would say that a lot of the same skills apply if you're briefing on any given matter or if you're in an interview and it's almost a brief on what it is how you're presenting yourself and answering the question on your experience or your knowledge. So I would say yes. I would say a lot of the skills are the same that you're using. Communication, being specific. You may strategy when you're doing interviews though is the person interviewing you will be writing down everything you say. So
Yes.
I mean, do you want to be brief or do you not want to be brief? Because you want to cover the gamut of whatever is written on his evaluation form, right? So I'd say maybe that might not be a very
Perhaps you want to be
in
succinct
sync.
enough
Yeah.
that they can write down every
So,
key point you say.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good questions. We have some more questions here. One of them being, can you please expand a bit more on the use of tables in briefings? I like that. That's a very good question. When is it appropriate to use tables, whether financial or otherwise, or pie charts, or any other venue to present data?
I'll start on that one. There are certain circumstances when it's ideal. When you absolutely, if you want to convey some piece of information, then showing it on a chart or showing it as a pie chart does it completely. There are other situations where you will get lost in the information. Too many numbers, too complicated. What's the purpose of all this given? And the skill set is figuring out the difference there. It's not a yes or no. It's normally, if you're trying to convey passage of time, events that occurred over a number of years, perhaps fiscal years, spending on a program or whatever it happened to be, then a table is what you do. And you say, here are the numbers, but you can see we started out at $15 and now we're at $1.5 million. We're spending a lot more money in this area, I mean, it's an obvious way to use it as a support tool, as not a prop as much as just as something in the background you use to make your point. That's when graphs and charts are the most appropriate for me. If it's simply displaying all the information and the audience pretty well has to understand all the numbers on that in order to move to the next slide, it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
So tables, according to you, David, are better used for comparative purposes.
Or even as a prop to make a point, right? So you've got a bunch of numbers there, but the key is at the bottom line, the right-hand corner. That's the one that really makes the difference. But here's how it comes. If you're trying to explain a whole series of interactions and information through one table, it'll get people lost.
It's too big.
Yeah,
It's too
much.
filled with data, not
Yeah.
enough context.
Yeah.
Jocelyn?
Yeah, the use of visuals, if used effectively, can be very useful. Financial tables and whatnot obviously are good. Yeah, it's your interpretation of the numbers basically that counts, and strip it down to the strict necessity. Avoid those giant financial tables if you can, because you'll get lost.
I love giant financial tables. We do that for estimates all the time.
Yeah.
We have another question here online. Do you use Prezi instead of PowerPoint? As you mentioned, death by PowerPoint. I've seen Prezi, and I've seen that it comes out with very original presentation decks. We don't really use that at Public Works. I was wondering if you gentlemen had any other software for presentations.
I've never experienced any other software, and that's in the 15 or 20 departments I've worked in the last 10 years. So I think everybody's pretty well on PowerPoint because of Microsoft.
Yeah, we use whatever we're given based on the licenses and whatnot. It's mostly Microsoft, yeah, Visio, Excel.
So the idea is that PowerPoint itself is not the problem. It's what people put on the PowerPoint or
Right,
how they
definitely.
present the information. Like the software is fine.
No, it's
The suite gives you everything you need and everything that is appropriate to convey a message effectively. But I think it's a fine balancing act of how much information to put in and how much context to give.
Well, and as I mentioned before, how much flash to put in with the basic message. I mean, you know, multiple colors and things flying off the page and back on the page may not be necessary, right? Especially if you're giving bad news.
Yeah. On that note, I mean, what do you think is some of the most important elements to consider when presenting bad news as opposed to good?
Sure. Most of the time, I think it's rare that we're always going to see our senior management with. It's good when you go see them and brief them on successes, but most of the time, no news is good news. So you tend not to see them if everything's going fine and dandy. It's when things are a bit more hectic and issues arise and problems arise, and you need to address them. In most cases, that's when you will meet your senior manager and go over whatever topic it is you need to go over. So make sure, like David said in his opening remarks, if there are issues, problems, or risks, that you go into the brief with solutions and options and you know where you're heading, basically. And you want to reassure your senior manager that your team is on top of things and let them know what the next steps are in order to put the baby to rest, basically.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We appreciate you being here with us today and for sharing your knowledge and experience. This webinar for our listeners and for our viewers will be archived online shortly, within a week. I'd also like to take the time to extend a big thank you to our supporters in the Aspiring Leaders Network, particularly Juliana Dong, Wendy Shi, Valencia Rodriguez, and Yang Nguyen, who worked hard to bring this presentation, the materials, and all the other elements together. Thank you for listening, participants online, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Just so you know, this presentation will be available in about a week. You can access it at www.fmi.ca. If you have any more questions, you can still submit it in the questions box. We'll try to answer them as much as we can. I'll post the answers once we post the rebroadcast. For our next session, we will have another webinar coming up in January 2015. We'll be rebroadcasting Beth Bell's very well-received presentation from PD Week 2014 as well. It was called Realizing Benefits While Transforming Governments and Business. Immediately following the presentation, Beth Bell will be live to answer your questions. As I mentioned in the beginning of the webinar, it is being presented by the Aspiring Leaders Network. We're constantly holding out events in different cities across Canada. We'd like to thank these two fine gentlemen, David and Joss, for your support today. And if you're ever interested or if you're ever curious about what we do in our events, look us up. We're online at fmi.ca/ALN. You can also find us on Facebook. So once again, gentlemen, thank you for being here today with us. And thank you, everyone, for listening and participating. Have a good day.